I've been quiet on this for the last week or so what exactly is happening in New York? Well, first let us point out that the media has been horrible, sure, but let us also point out that Sanders is still drawing gigantic multiracial crowds. It is clear that you have an establishment buckling against the populist movement. That's very clear. It's clear as day to anybody that gets their news from a good source. There's consequently a conflict developing on the ground where the establishment is buckling down, but the groundswell is increasing. Okay, the populist movement is growing. So how do you quantify it though? We know that this conflict is developing. What level is it on? What side? Well, that's what the polls are for, right? Now, I'm supposed to know how to read these things, but what I've learned over the last few months is that the American polling firms do strange things with the data, and it's very difficult to know how to read into them as a result. I'm also not certain that they're honest or that the results on the ground are fair. In fact, I'm pretty sure that some of the states were rigged, and that went over that. So instead of trying to make predictions in such a messy climate, I'm instead going to draw some attention to some possible points of error. First, let's understand what the polls actually say. In most circumstances, I'll argue against taking a straight polling average, but the race in New York is the rare circumstance where this actually works out. The reason is that it's a closed primary, and I'll come back to that. So it kind of does approximate market research, and rather than try and figure out which way the masses are careening, you want to balance the data out. So yes, you'll get a few polls that are around a 10% spread, plus or minus 4 to 5. Then you'll get a few that suggest it's more like 15. It'll balance out to around plus 12. And this is the right way to read it. The polling right now suggests that the race is stable and the spread is over 10%. That would imply a comfortable Clinton win. So where could it go wrong? Well, I've drawn a heavy attention to the idea of racist modeling. When these polling companies put their numbers out, it's not a straight tally. It's adjusted to fit census results. To bake a bias into their polling, it could come out in their projections. I've hinted at the idea that there's a strong reason to suspect that this is happening. If so, the polling could be exaggerating Clinton's lead with minority groups and thereby exaggerating her lead altogether. So there may be reason to expect a surprise, except not, because it's a closed primary. Now, closed primaries are not closed by some accident. They're designed to exclude the unwashed masses, which means they have a class bias baked into them. After you cancel everything else, the closed primary is actually likely to maintain Clinton's lead with minorities, because it's likely to exclude less wealthy minorities who didn't register in time. So what the closed primary does is it gives an exaggerated voice to the wealthy, regardless of anything else, right? And so you'll see that she'll win pretty much all of the demographics by a large amount, because you're really only, the only non-wealthy people that you're picking up are union members, right? Who are the card-carrying Democrats? Well, you've got wealthy, educated people, and then you've got union stiffs, right? Either way, you're going to see a big Clinton bias in both of those groups. And nobody will deny that Clinton has a substantial lead with wealthy minorities, many of whom would probably vote Republican if the party was more pluralist, because they're wealthy. So it's a class thing, right? If you have lots of money, you want to vote for the people that are going to have your taxes the lowest. You're not going to be as concerned about the kinds of social justice issues that less wealthy people are going to be concerned about. So we're careening towards a reality where you have a conservative party for whites, that's the Republicans, and a conservative party for browns and blacks, it's the Democrats. Okay, the policies are almost identical. Very right-wing parties, both the Democrats and the Republicans, are both careening very far to the right of center, and the difference is not really down to policy, it's just down to what color you are. And it's not an accident. That's the way the media is constructing it, right? It's not as though whites are naturally going to one party and browns are naturally going to the other. It's that the media is pushing you into these different categories, right? The proper analysis here is Gramscian, right? It's the manufacturing of a class division. Class divisions are not natural. Racism is not normal. Okay, I don't agree with all of that line of thinking. Rather, it's created from the top down. These racial divisions are fostered and desired by the upper class in order to create the division. This is something that goes, I've been over this a few times. This is not new. Okay, Zinn is the best source of this that I know of. This goes back to the beginning of the country. The whole basis of the United States of America is that the ruling class creates a racial division, and then they get, the whites and the blacks, they fight over it. They fight with each other, so that when they're fighting with each other, they don't fight the class basis. And it's frustrating because you talk to a lot of people on the ground that call themselves activists, and they're completely brainwashed, right? This whole, it's all about race, it's all about gender. No, that's what the upper class wants you to think, so that it distracts you from the actual class basis of things. Okay, and again, this is a deep reading. This goes back a long ways. Okay, it's designed that way. Every time you hear somebody say that it's not about class, it's about race, they are repeating class-based propaganda. And it's very old, okay? Clinton is arguably an even better spokesperson for this group than Obama. But it's really about class, even if it's a consequence of racialized politics in the Republican Party. The rules in New York are designed so that these wealthy and usually very educated minorities get a say because they knew to register ahead of time, while the poor minorities don't because they didn't, or because they didn't have the right identification or whatever other thing, right? So we need to ask the question, how many of the people at these impressively sized multiracial rallies are going to be able to actually vote? And I think the answer is going to be disappointingly few. I suspect that Sanders may win an open primary, and that the correlations by race would break down in such an open primary. But it isn't an open primary, and so the correlations by race will establish themselves, and he won't win. Again, I need to request that you stay safe on Tuesday if you live in New York. Okay, there's going to be a lot of people that want to vote for Sanders and can't, and they're going to be understandably frustrated. So I again need to point out that the real story is the question of why New York has a closed primary. Hopefully that issue gets addressed. Clinton may not actually win, or at least she might not win an open tally of the popular vote, but you should expect her to win the official vote totals, and probably convincingly. What I'm getting at is that whatever the results actually say, it doesn't mean a lot, because of the nature of the primary. Whatever media headlines you see throwing at you are largely going to be dishonest. And this isn't a sore loser type thing. I'm a Canadian. I don't really have a horse here. I'm just analyzing from a distance. And my analysis from a distance is that whatever happens in New York, it might make a big difference with the delegate math, but it's really not a convincing victory. There's not really any way that Clinton can win this convincingly. And the takeaway coming out of New York is less what the size of Clinton's victory is, and more what the size of Sanders' rallies are. Because when you have a situation like this, where it appears to anyone who's really paying attention that Sanders is actually winning, but that his supporters can't vote for him, the result is not a decisive victory or a convincing win. The only thing that comes out decisive here is that there's a lack of democracy at play, and that's what really gets the attention drawn to, is that this isn't a fair win. And if you're looking at it from the Clinton side, you want to be equally upset, because even if she would win an open primary, that question will always be there, right? And there's really nothing that can be done to resolve that. There's no way to convince Sanders supporters that she won fair and square, because even if she won fair and square, she didn't win fair and square. um, and that is the truth of this, right? So that's the real story coming up in New York. That the results are not going to be convincing in any way. The only thing that really is convincing is that there's a lot of people that weren't able to vote, and there's a big democratic deficit that has become glaringly apparent. It's the real story in New York.